About 15 years ago, I was in a long lineup during the holiday season, waiting to send a package without cell phone to distract me. And it took about half hour before I got up to the counter, and when I was finally there, the woman who greeted me was rude. And I don't mean just a little bit off, having a bad day, grumpy. She was actually quite hostile. And my first reaction was to call her out on it. But around that time, I was reading a lot about brain plasticity and the fact that we could become more empathic with practice. So instead of escalating the situation, I took a beat and I looked at her in the eye and I asked, "Are you okay?" There was a pause. She was trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic or sincere. And then she burst into tears. She said, "I've been working double shifts for 2 weeks straight. My son's at home with a fever. I think I'm getting sick. It's 3 p.m, and I haven't had a lunch break. I'm just flat out exhausted." And I remember reaching across the counter, hold her hands. 10 seconds earlier, I despised this woman. And then I found myself locked in an empathic embrace. Empathy is our superpower. And since then, over the years, I've learned that empathy is actually really good for us. At the moment that we were holding hands, if my brain had been attached to an fMRI machine, the scan would have shown that the pleasure and reward centers of my brain were lit up, just like when somebody's eating a delicious piece of chocolate cake or is high on psychedelics. The reality is that when we're feeling this connection with another person, it's like a high to our brain. And it's actually really good for our bodies too, because all that empathic connection, it actually replaces the stressful hormones like cortisol with the feel-good hormones of serotonin and oxytocin. So what's the problem? Well, we can't empathize when we're feeling overwhelmed. It's true, we can't be in a state of stress and compassion, a state of anxiety and grace at the same time. And the neuroscience about this is crystal clear. But last year, I lived it. So in April, I published my first book and went on a book tour. And it was a dream come true. But after 16 days on the road, I was so flat out tired. And I remember getting onto the train for the last trip home to Montreal, telling myself, 5 hours to go, 5 hours to go, 5 hours to go. And then imagine 20 little kilometers or 15 miles away from the final destination, and the train came to a complete stop. Now, initially, it was like, okay, this is a bit of a bummer, but after an hour, everybody on the train was getting antsy. And finally, a woman who worked for the train came into our compartment to make an announcement. She said, "Sadly, there's been a fatality. Someone has lost their life on the tracks." And you could feel the mood in the train change in an instant. Whatever we were thinking about, how, oh, we're late, this is delayed, was replaced by this sense of collective empathy. But it took 4 hours for the authorities to actually finish their investigation. 4 hours of waiting. So by the time we actually got back on the tracks, headed to Montreal, everybody was back to being irritated and annoyed and frustrated, including me, I hate to admit, which is why I often think about that trip home. How is it possible that the empathy was so palpable and then within a matter of a couple of hours, it just dissipated? But as a researcher, I understand that there are limits to empathy, right? I just said before, we can't empathize. Our brains cannot empathize when we're feeling depleted or overwhelmed or stressed or anxious. So is it any wonder in our culture that empathy is on the decline, right? When we're so busy pushing ourselves to the limits, worried about inflation and the next election and the wars. And how can we expect our children to show more kindness to one another when they're up against things like active shooter drills and eco-anxiety? But what if we could develop a set of skills that would help us in our modern day? A set of skills around self-regulation, a set of skills to flex our empathy muscles, a set of skills to maybe even change the world. I have a PhD in education, and for my own thesis research, I was interested in developing curriculum that would inspire the next generation of leaders and change makers. So I interviewed social entrepreneurs. These are the founders of nonprofit organizations that are doing work to help solve some of the most important environmental and social problems we face in the world today. I wanted to know what they had in common, and I discovered that they have two things. The first is that they have service modeled in their homes, meaning to say that their families take them out volunteering, and they live with this sort of like ethos of giving back to their community. The second thing I discovered that they have in common is that when they saw a group of people who were marginalized or disenfranchised or hurting in some way, they felt compelled to act on empathy. They felt compelled to act on empathy. And that insight of how powerful empathy is as a driver for social change transformed my life and certainly has changed how I show up in the classroom. Now, I've been teaching undergrads, college for over a decade. And regardless of course that I teach, on the first day of class, I always do the same thing. I show them a set of letters, and I give them 60 seconds to unscramble these letters to form a complete sentence. And then I do the big reveal. You are better than you think you are. 8 little words of positive affirmation. Next, I do something that I think is a little unorthodox. I walk around the room, my classroom, and with each and every student, I crouch down to eye level, and one at a time I say, you are better than you think you are. You are better than you think you are. Now, why do I do that? Because Maya Angelou was right. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. There's something else that I do on that first day of class. I invite all my students to join me on a spaceship, and we pretend we're aliens traveling across the ether to planet Earth to do a little bit of anthropological research. And the data points are not pretty. They would notice human trafficking and modern-day slavery and biodiversity loss and wealth inequality and massive starvation. Now, I know that there are many efforts underway, thank goodness, to solve those world's problems. And the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are a good example. But did you know that those goals were launched in 2015 with a 15-year range? And with 6 years to go, we've only achieved 12%? We need a paradigm shift. And so I want to introduce you to the Inner Development Goals. There we go. This is a framework of 23 skills and qualities that humans, all of us, can develop to live more purposeful and sustainable lives. And it was launched in 2020 in Sweden. It's an open source initiative grounded in the best science of inner development. Can you imagine what it would be like from kindergarten all the way through your education and including your professional development if you could learn skills like how to be present, compassion and empathy, intercultural competence, courage, optimism, and perseverance? I think we'd be living in a different world. It's the kind of world that I'd love our children to inherit. A couple of years ago, I watched the classic film E.T. with my daughter, Annika. She was about 6 years old at the time. And she laughed out loud when E.T. was drinking beer at home and Elliot was getting drunk in the classroom. And she loved the iconic scene when they fly over the moon on the bicycle with his little red hoodie. And tears welled up in her eyes when E.T.'s heart stopped beating. At the end of the movie, she asked me, "Mom, why is that movie so touching?" and I was flooded with emotion. And I think I must have said, it must be because we all find it hard to say goodbye to people we love. Einstein famously said, we cannot solve problems with the same level of consciousness that we created them with. And I believe when it comes to education today, education must be designed and dedicated to elevating our human consciousness, especially our empathic consciousness. Now, we watched E.T. a second time over the holidays a month ago, and my daughter loved the movie even more, and I had a realization. Why is E.T. so touching? E.T., that film, is so moving and so life-affirming because it celebrates empathy between a little boy and an alien other. And it reminds us that we all have so much more in common than we think. And it reminds us that we really, truly are interconnected. Thank you.